At 61, Nicolas Cage is finally opening up about something fans have long suspected, and trust us, it's not what you expect. After decades of keeping quiet, the iconic actor has broken his silence, spilling details that will leave you stunned. From his wild career choices to the personal truth he's kept hidden, Cage is ready to set the record straight. Get ready for a revelation that will change everything you thought you knew about this Hollywood legend. Nicolas Cage's early life wasn't what you'd expect for someone who would go on to become one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Growing up in Long Beach, California, he was the youngest of three brothers in a family where both intellect and artistry were highly valued. His father, August Floyd Coppola, was a professor of literature, a man who loved ideas and philosophy more than anything. His mother, Joy Vogelang, was a dancer and choreographer, full of passion and grace, but also deeply fragile. The house was filled with art, old books, and coffee, but it wasn't always a place of peace. Behind the beauty, there was an undercurrent of tension. Cage would later talk about the strange mix of creativity and unpredictability in his home. Some days were full of light, and others were heavy with silence and uncertainty. That silence, he would say, shaped him more than anything. His mother, while incredibly creative, often struggled with her emotions, sometimes retreating into sadness or even disappearing for months at a time when she was hospitalized. For Cage, the silence became a constant companion, one that followed him long after he left home. His parents' marriage, which had once seemed full of promise, eventually collapsed. When Cage was just 12 years old, his parents got a divorce. The separation was hard on him, and it left a mark that would last for years. It was at that moment that the emotional balance of his world was shattered. Cage spent the following years living with his father, who raised him with discipline and structure. His mother, although still a part of his life, was now more of a distant figure. The divorce had created a chasm between them, and Cage often felt like he was caught in the middle of two worlds, one of logic and reason with his father, and the other of emotion and chaos with his mother. It was a struggle to make sense of it all. He once said that his father gave him intellect, while his mother gave him emotions, and he's been living between them ever since. Growing up in Beverly Hills didn't make things easier. Although it was a beautiful, glamorous place, Cage felt out of place. His family name, Coppola, carried a certain weight that brought unwanted attention. He often faced teasing and mockery from classmates who assumed that his future was already decided because of his famous last name. This only pushed him further into himself. He became withdrawn, using his newfound identity as Roy Richards to hide from the pressure. Eventually, he adopted the name Nicolas Cage, inspired by avant-garde composer John Cage and Marvel's Luke Cage, symbols of artistic freedom. This was his way of taking control, of pushing away the shadow of his family name, and starting fresh. Despite all this, Cage never gave up on his dreams. By his teens, he had discovered acting, and it became his refuge. Inspired by the emotional intensity of James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause and the martial arts power of Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, Cage felt the pull of Hollywood. He saw acting as a way to channel all the pain and silence from his childhood into something that could be shared with the world. It was through this journey that he started to rebuild himself, taking every wound from his past and turning it into fuel for his craft. Those early years were filled with heartbreak and loneliness, but they shaped Nicolas Cage into the actor and the person he would become. Nicolas Cage's journey into acting wasn't an easy one, and it certainly didn't follow the typical path of a young actor from a famous family. Born Nicholas Kim Coppola in 1964, Cage grew up in the shadows of the prestigious Coppola name, which was both a gift and a curse. His uncle, Francis Ford Coppola, was a legendary filmmaker, best known for creating the Godfather trilogy, and his family's legacy was well known in Hollywood. For many, having such a powerful connection would have been a ticket to instant success. But for Cage, it was a heavy burden that weighed him down from an early age. From a young age, Cage felt like an outsider. His classmates at Beverly Hills High School mocked him, making it clear that they saw him as someone who only had a shot at success because of his family name. They didn't see him as an individual with his own talents and aspirations. They saw him as Coppola's nephew, a boy who had everything handed to him. This constant teasing stung. It made him angry and, more importantly, made him question who he was. He didn't want to be defined by his family. He wanted to prove that he could make it on his own. that he wasn't just another product of nepotism. That anger and frustration led him to make a bold decision. Cage decided to change his name, distancing himself from the shadow of the Coppola legacy. He chose the name Nicolas Cage, inspired by two things: avant-garde composer John Cage, who represented freedom of expression and nonconformity, and Marvel's Luke Cage, a superhero who symbolized resilience. To Cage, this was an act of defiance, a way to build his own identity and create a career that would stand on its own. It wasn't just a name change, it was a turning point in his life. Even though he had distanced himself from his famous family, Cage still had to navigate the tough, competitive world of Hollywood. He wasn't some rookie actor who could slip into roles easily, nor was he going to be handed opportunities just because of his last name. It was going to be a fight, and Cage was ready for it. He began auditioning relentlessly, taking any role that would give him the chance to be seen, even if the parts were small or unremarkable. This was a time when rejection was part of his daily routine. The young actor faced many obstacles, including financial struggles and feelings of invisibility. But there was something inside him that wouldn't let him quit. By the time Cage turned 17, he was living a very different life from most teenagers. While his peers were still figuring out who they were, Cage had already started down the road to finding his identity. He made the choice to leave behind his comfortable home and the privileges that came with his last name. He didn't want the world to view him as someone who was handed everything on a silver platter. He wanted to prove that he could make it on his own. He took on odd jobs, from selling popcorn at a local theater to working in low-paying positions just to make ends meet. The city of Los Angeles, with all its promises of fame and fortune, felt distant and out of reach. But for Cage, the hunger for recognition and the desire to make something of himself was stronger than any of the challenges he faced. In the early 1980s, Cage's big break came when he landed a role in the film Rumblefish, directed by his uncle Francis Ford Coppola. Though it was a small role, it gave Cage the chance to prove himself, not just as Coppola's nephew, but as an actor who could stand on his own. He wasn't handed the part out of family loyalty. He earned it through his sheer determination. But even with that first film, Cage still struggled with his identity as an actor. He didn't want to rely on family connections, and he worked hard to make sure that he was cast for his ability, not his last name. As he continued his career, Cage found himself in a tug-of-war with his past. His uncle, though supportive, was a constant reminder of the famous legacy Cage was trying to distance himself from. But at the same time, he was grateful for the opportunities his uncle's fame provided. By 1984, Cage had built a small reputation for himself in the acting world. He was starting to get better roles, but he still hadn't made a name for himself in a big way. His breakthrough performance came in 1987 with the film Moonstruck, where he played the charming, albeit slightly crazy, Ronnie Camerari. The film was a romantic comedy that showcased Cage's raw energy and intensity, two qualities that would become staples of his acting style. His performance was unlike anything Hollywood had seen before, wild, unpredictable, and filled with emotion. It was during this film that people began to realize just how unique Cage was as an actor. He wasn't interested in playing it safe or following the conventional routes that so many other actors did. Instead, he was willing to take risks, to pour his soul into every character he played, no matter how crazy or intense they seemed. The success of Moonstruck opened the doors for Cage to take on more challenging roles. He was soon cast in Raising Arizona, 1987, and Leaving Las Vegas, 1995, two films that would define his career and solidify his place as one of Hollywood's most unpredictable and talented actors. But despite the success, the struggle to define his identity as an actor continued. Cage didn't want to be boxed into one type of role. He wasn't interested in being just the quirky, eccentric character or the brooding, romantic lead. He wanted to do it all, and so he took on a variety of roles, each one pushing him to his limits. But even as he was finding his identity on screen, the personal struggles that had haunted him as a child never fully left him. His early family life, marked by his parents' turbulent relationship and eventual divorce, had shaped him in ways he was only starting to understand. Cage often found himself using the pain and confusion of his childhood as fuel for his performances. His acting became a way to express the emotions and the brokenness he had felt in his youth, something he hadn't been able to articulate until he discovered the power of storytelling. The characters he portrayed were often intense, searching for meaning in a chaotic world, much like he had been during his younger years. His acting was raw, honest, and deeply personal. It wasn't just about performing, it was about exercising his own demons through the roles he took on. As Cage's career progressed, so did his reputation for being one of Hollywood's most unpredictable and intense actors. He became known for his wild, sometimes over-the-top performances, but also for his willingness to push the boundaries of what an actor could do. He would go to extreme lengths to get into character, often putting his own well-being at risk to bring a level of authenticity to his roles. For Birdie 1984, he had 2 of his teeth pulled without anesthesia to understand the pain his character was going through. This was Cage's approach to acting. He didn't want to just play the part, he wanted to be the part, to live it. His willingness to sacrifice for his art set him apart from other actors, making him an unforgettable presence on screen. Through all the struggles, the rejections, and the painful early years, Cage had slowly built a career. He had worked hard to carve out his own identity, free from the shadow of his famous family name. But the journey was far from over. His early experiences shaped the man and actor he would become, someone who was willing to take risks, embrace challenges, and never stop searching for meaning in both his work and his personal life. The struggle for identity was not just a part of his career, it was a part of who he was, and it would remain with him throughout his entire journey in Hollywood. It wasn't always easy, but it was what made Nicolas Cage, Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage's rise to fame wasn't exactly a smooth climb, but it was one that would eventually see him stand at the top of Hollywood. After years of struggling and fighting to prove himself, Cage finally got the break he needed. His journey began with small roles, but they were enough to plant the seed for something bigger. He wasn't just trying to be another actor in Hollywood. He was determined to make his mark, to stand out in a way that no one expected. His first major breakthrough came in 1987 with Moonstruck, where he played the passionate and quirky Ronnie Camilleri. His performance was unlike anything audiences had seen before. He wasn't the typical romantic lead. Cage didn't play it safe or go for the polished, smooth character you might expect in a romantic comedy. Instead, he threw himself into the role, fully embracing the chaos, the passion, and the vulnerability of his character. Audiences took notice. Moonstruck was a hit, and Cage's performance earned him widespread recognition. It was the beginning of his rise to fame, and it wasn't just about his acting skills. It was about his ability to take risks, to push boundaries, and to bring a raw energy to his roles that made him unforgettable. From there, Cage's career seemed to explode. He followed up Moonstruck with Raising Arizona, 1987, another standout film where he played a quirky but lovable character named H.I. McDonough. In this film, Cage showcased his versatility, blending comedy with a sense of desperation that was both hilarious and heartfelt. Once again, audiences saw him in a different light, an actor who wasn't afraid to take on unusual roles, someone who wasn't trying to fit into the mold of the typical leading man. His unique blend of energy and vulnerability quickly became his trademark. But it was in the 1990s that Cage truly became a household name. Films like The Rock, 1996, Con Air, 1997, and Face Off, 1997, solidified him as one of Hollywood's biggest stars. These were high-octane, action-packed films, and Cage threw himself into them with all the intensity and wildness that had become his trademark. He wasn't just acting, he was living in the moment, embodying these larger-than-life characters with a passion that made them feel real. He brought a depth to his roles that made them stand out from the typical action heroes. He wasn't just the tough guy or the bad guy. He was a man wrestling with deep inner conflict, struggling with his own humanity amidst the chaos around him. His success in these action films made him a global superstar, and for a while, it seemed like nothing could stop him. The money rolled in, the fame skyrocketed, and he was everywhere. But as much as Cage enjoyed the ride, something was starting to shift within him. Behind the flashing cameras and the applause, there was a darker side to the fame he had achieved. The pressure of being constantly in the public eye began to take its toll. In many ways, Hollywood had always been a place of extremes for Cage. On one hand, he was living out the dream. He was a movie star, adored by millions. On the other, he was wrestling with deep personal struggles that no amount of fame could fix. His relationships were falling apart, and his personal life seemed to be in chaos. He had already been through multiple marriages, and his finances, while once seemingly endless, started to take a hit. Cage's life, both on and off the screen, became a whirlwind of excess, instability, and self-doubt. Fame, it seemed, had a dark side that Cage was only beginning to understand. In 1995, he starred in Leaving Las Vegas, a role that would win him an Academy Award for Best Actor. It was a performance that defined his career, a raw, unflinching portrayal of a man spiraling into self-destruction. Cage's character, Ben Sanderson, was a man who had already given up on life, consumed by alcoholism and unable to escape his inner turmoil. It was one of the darkest, most emotionally draining roles he'd ever taken on. And while it earned him critical acclaim, it also pushed him to the edge. The lines between acting and reality began to blur, and Cage found himself struggling to separate his character from his own emotions. His commitment to the role was both his greatest strength and his biggest weakness. At the same time, the pressures of fame were starting to break him down. Cage had become known for taking on multiple projects a year, sometimes filming up to 4 or 5 movies in a single year. The intense work schedule, the constant need to perform, and the endless round of interviews and media appearances all added to the strain. The fast-paced lifestyle of a Hollywood superstar was starting to take its toll on Cage's health, his personal life, and his peace of mind. He was chasing success, but at what cost? By the time the 2000s rolled around, Cage had become one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. Films like National Treasure 2004 brought him massive commercial success, and his net worth ballooned to an impressive $150 million. But as his wealth and fame grew, so did his personal struggles. Cage began to feel the weight of his success more than ever. The world had placed him on a pedestal, and the pressure to maintain that status became unbearable. In the midst of all this, Cage began to make some reckless financial decisions. He indulged in extravagant purchases, buying multiple mansions, rare collectibles, and even a private island. But by 2008, everything came crashing down. The global financial crisis hit, and Cage found himself deep in debt. His extravagant lifestyle had caught up with him. The IRS filed a $6.3 million lien against him, and he was forced to sell many of his assets, including his beloved properties. His financial collapse was widely reported, and it seemed like Cage's life was spiraling out of control. Despite the chaos in his personal and professional life, Cage remained determined. He refused to declare bankruptcy, choosing instead to pay off his debts through hard work. He took on film after film, often working for much less than he had in his prime. But this period of relentless work was also a turning point for Cage. It was as if he was trying to prove to himself that he could survive, that he could rebuild, no matter how many times life knocked him down. And slowly, through sheer determination, Cage began to get back on his feet. Hollywood had once been a place of dreams for Cage, but it had also been a place where those dreams came with a heavy price. Fame, success, and fortune had come with their own set of challenges, and for Cage, the toll of Hollywood was evident in the way it had impacted his personal life, his finances, and his sense of self. Yet through it all, Cage had shown resilience. He wasn't just a product of Hollywood's glitzy image. He was a man who had weathered the storm, endured the ups and downs, and emerged with a sense of wisdom and perspective that only someone who had lived through it could understand. In the years that followed, Cage would continue to work in Hollywood, but he did so on his own terms. No longer chasing fame or fortune, he focused on roles that mattered to him, and he embraced the simplicity of life outside the limelight. Cage had risen to fame, but it was the toll that Hollywood had taken on him that ultimately helped him find a new sense of purpose and balance. It was a reminder that success isn't just about achieving greatness. It's about surviving the challenges that come with it and learning to find peace along the way. After the chaos of fame and fortune, Nicolas Cage found himself at a crossroads. The golden years of stardom had faded, leaving him with the weight of his mistakes and the scars of his past. But it wasn't the fame or money that mattered anymore. What mattered was finding peace. With his financial collapse and personal losses behind him, Cage began a slow process of rebirth. He didn't need Hollywood's validation. He needed to find his own truth. This journey wasn't easy. Cage poured himself into his work, but not for the same reasons he once did. He sought roles that resonated with him on a deeper level. Films that weren't just about the paycheck, but about genuine connection. Slowly, he began to rebuild his life, focusing on family and personal growth rather than fame or fortune. He married Riko Shibata, a woman who brought him the peace he'd been searching for. Together, they built a quiet life, far from the chaos of his past. When Cage became a father again, this time to a daughter, he experienced a new kind of joy, one rooted in simplicity. For Cage, it wasn't about starting over, it was about redemption, finding the peace he had longed for and building a new beginning, one moment at a time.